Welcome to the House of Mirelle. The House of Mirelle was a fashion house that sold and made clothes in the Yorkshire city of Hull in England between 1938 and 1978. In this introduction, you'll be hearing about its locations, that's the places Mirelle was found, and some of the history behind Hull's famous fashion house. The House of Mirelle was owned by actress and businesswoman Mira Mountain. Mira, always pronounced that way. Open Mirelle, she said, because she'd always been interested in the world of high-class fashion and clothes. During the 20s and 30s, actresses who were around the same age as her were fashion icons. Mira Johnson, her stage name, had national prominence, and her fame and independent income, social connections and business nous meant Mirelle Gowns was successful from the moment it opened in Hull. By the time this photo was taken in the late 50s, Mira, touching the arm of her husband Percy, ran Hull's premier fashion house. Friends like the lady on the right came to what was affectionately called mirrors because they knew they could find that perfect outfit for any occasion, which would be impossible in the shops elsewhere in Hull and so close. From what the men are wearing, you can tell this occasion was black tie, which meant formal dress, the ideal opportunity to shop for something exclusive. But if you look at what the women are wearing, it's clear they were dressed up properly too, what black tie meant to them in the invitation they held in their hands. Throughout the time it was open, Mira wore items sourced at the House of Mirelle, and her friends shopped there also, so it's likely both outfits were bought specially for the event. Unfortunately, we don't know what the occasion was or who the people are talking to Mira and Percy, but they look a bit like brother and sister, so do comment or contact us if you recognise them or have any suggestions about their outfits or the venue. We'd love to know. You can tell how expensive their outfits are by the fabric. The high sheen emphasises the thickness and depth of a glossy silk or satin. The embroidery on the second dress making it very much a couture brand, which could only be bought in one place in Hull from the 30s to the 70s. Let's look at where Mirelle was situated and learn a little bit about the city over those years. 20 years before the photo was taken, fashion in the late 1930s was very different from fashion we know today. Then Britain was littered with small to medium-sized independent clothes shops, and Hull's retail community was the same. Affluent due to its position on the northeast coastline of England, directly opposite the tip of Germany, far away across the North Sea, Britain's third port thrived when Mirelle was established, fishing its lifeblood, fuelled by the city docks that thousands worked in. The East Riding of Yorkshire surrounding the city had wide rolling fields of fertile farmland, business and industry making many rich as well. The Humber River stretched for miles away from the city into Yorkshire, Hull resting on its mouth, and it was shipping and fishing the city was mostly known for. Wealthy families could afford a high standard of living and had expectations of being clothed to match. Across Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, on the other side of the Humber to its south, the well-to-do owned estates and stately homes, some of their daughters presented to the Queen as debutantes. For affluent women like these, fashion was a pastime as well as a way to be clothed. Like Mira and her friend, it was a necessity, according to what their diary promised, and a symbol of status and income as well. Wealthy women saw clothes as an investment. They were prepared to spend a lot of money on something special, and in Hull, big department stores like Hammonds, Thornton Varley's, Edwin Davis or Costello's catered to their needs. Small clothing retailers had their shops as family concerns, also independent like Mira's, names that conjured up their storefronts and stock to all women in the area. Elsie Battle, Pixie Berks and Irene Leonard. Marie Adair, owned by a Jewess, one of her customers said of the large Jewish community in the city, and many others with equally as unique names and identities. Madam shops, they called them, because, "Can I help you, madam?" was the first thing they heard when they walked in. Described as an island by one of Mirelle's employees, Hull had dynamics affecting shopping as unique as the women who shopped there or owned them, and that included Madame Clapham, the couture dressmaker, famous for many years for dressing the royalty of Europe, as well as well-to-do women in England and Hull. Madame Clapham offered the pinnacle of clothes making, dressmaker, a British term meaning the same as couturier, someone who designed and made clothes from start to finish in a fashion house with skilled seamstresses doing the sewing work. Cut off from easy access to the rest of Britain due to its position on the Humber, Hull Paragon Station connected with the rest of the country, but train travel could be long. It wouldn't be until 1981 that the Humber Bridge opened, spanning the river between Hull and Lincolnshire for as many years a ferry ride away, steam puffing from the chimney of the Lincoln Castle steamboat as it sailed the brown waters between them. Being an island city in the east of Yorkshire meant women flocked to its centre from all round. They came from towns like Bridlington, Market Weighton, the seaside town of Hornsey, Beverley and Driffield, as well as from Lincolnshire, and the shopping districts that included the House of Mirelle can still be seen in the city if you explore from Paragon Station today. Radiating from City Square, where a statue of Queen Victoria surveyed the view sagely, ornate stone-carved buildings housed a range of retailers crammed against municipal buildings like the dock offices, Ferens Art Gallery and City Hall. Each road headed to the inky green waters of Prince's Dock, where tall masts of shipping bobbed like transient buildings before sailing away. Along Prospect, Savile, Jameson, Paragon, White Frigate and King Edward Street, owners pulled awnings over shop windows and people visited in their droves to buy. Women's outfitters or women's wear departments in places like Hammonds or Edwin Davis stocked national brands, Matita, Dorville, Woolens, Cresta and Jaeger amongst others, and these rubbed shoulders with dressmaking in independent fashion houses like Mirelle. In the beginning, Mirelle started small, said one customer, opening in a culture where buying good quality clothing was expensive and intensive. For wealthy women requiring a suitable wardrobe, it required time, effort, knowledge and skill, as well as disposable income, and Mirelle being in the city helped enormously. They'd need to travel to have the sequence of fittings necessary for bespoke clothes made to their measurements, a system today we'd call couture. The environment was right to develop a new idea, but it also needed a sprinkling of something different to attract business from other retailers in Yorkshire and Hull. That Miss Mira B Johnson owned the House of Mirelle was part of what made it successful. Married to Percy, director of Drapers P. Moss & Co., she was a wealthy woman herself, who networked with a ready-made clientele, sharing her lifestyle and way of living. Mira understood what was required by ladies of status, visibility and taste, and the challenges that came with it as well. Do you think they'd be called a power couple today? Let us know in the comments below. Running at right angles from Prospect, Albion Street in 1938 looked very similar to this Victorian picture, which was drawn near the junction of Percy Street, the columns of the Congregational Church, flat-fronted Church Institute and Central Library behind the artist, Mirelle gowns a few steps away on the other side. Number 6 was Georgian, a tall, slender building in a neat row with 2 columns on either side of the front door. If someone turned right out of the front door, the Royal Institution Art Museum and Gallery would be there, and if they turned left, the entrance to Story Street, a short road diagonally connecting Albion with Prospect and King Edward Streets, where they'd end up during the war, but more about that later. Opposite a row of townhouses where dentists and doctors worked, in August 1938 it was first established as a high-class dressmaking business and named Mirelle Gowns. It ran at number 6, with models, which were known as mannequins then, wearing designs in a showroom full of clients and dressmakers making items in a workroom, both sides separate. Although over time the business evolved, as we will see, the division between showroom and workroom lasted until its closure in 1978. Before the war, there was a perception that even good quality ready-to-wear clothing from labels like Dorville was not as good as made to measure, and so in the late 1930s dressmaking was an essential part of clothing oneself. The highest level of sewing was haute couture, Paris internationally recognised as the centre of its fashion. Hull had many private dressmakers, London its couturiers and tailors also, like the Queen's dressmaker Norman Hartnell or Hardy Amers, and like Mirelle each designed and made one-off items by hand in a process called made-to-measure or bespoke. Affluent women could travel to London and maybe France to be measured for couture there, but to reach from Hull required many trips for many fittings, the fine-tuned detail that couturiers required to create one-off versions of an original design. Mirelle solved this problem by offering an exclusive gown buying and dressmaking service under one roof, and by 1940 they expanded to stock good quality ready-to-wear so that dressmaking and already made clothes were available at number 6 Albion Street, side by side. The showroom would have taken up one room and the workroom another. Can you imagine the ladies sitting and watching mannequins walking up and down in new creation? They'd be treated like special guests inside. Almost as soon as it opened, World War II broke out, and it had a huge impact on both Hull and the House of Mirelle. Like many businesses, it was affected not only because of the Blitz to follow, but also because of decisions the British government made to successfully prosecute, that means administrate and pay for, the war. From 1941, clothes rationing and restrictions to design meant fashion became highly regulated and the focus changed from luxury to necessity, make do and mend. Although London fashion houses stayed open, occupied by Nazi Germany, Parisian couture houses closed. As time drew on, a sober atmosphere contrasted with Mira's vision. In common with all British fashion retailers, it stocked clothes produced under the utility scheme, where prices and quality were standardised across all makers, its dressmaking arm hampered by restrictions called austerity measures as well. Clothes rationing meant the luxury of pre-war fashion they were used to at 6 Albion Street was curtailed until it ended in March 1949. Battered and bruised, the most bombed city outside London was decimated by the Blitz, taking Costellos, Hammonds, Edwin Davis, Thornton Varleys and even Elsie Battle. but Mirelle survived the bombs and fires that destroyed them. Number 6 Albion Street was damaged in March 1941, then again in 43 when the Royal Institution burnt down. 6 Albion Street no longer exists because of clearing the city of the blackened and burned bricks of wartime. Demolition in 1949 left numbers 8 and 9 standing. Then again, as this picture shows beforehand, after 1965, the remains of the road came to an end as well. The Church Institute also survived when Albion Street was bombed, the worst days described in the Hull Daily Mail of May 1941 as "terror reigns from the sky." In this photo taken in 2017, the striped red bricks of the Central Library are on the left, but the addition of the lighter extension on the far right of the Institute was not present in Mirelle's day, changing its 4-storey square shape as it was then. Used as a library and for meeting rooms and before fire damage in the raids of March 1941, Mirelle gowns moved across the road to there. Flat-fronted and with a staircase following the inside walls like a lighthouse, they took Studio 5, rooms big enough to house the showroom and workroom, and remained there during the Hull Blitz and much of the early part of the war. The Church Institute was the most long-standing part of Mirelle's history, a workroom there until December 1970, although in the 40s additional space further down at number 23 above the Georgian Cafe and at 8 Percy Street was also used. Mirelle's workrooms were as important as the showrooms or shop floors. It was there designs were made up or alterations carried out by skilled sewing staff. You'll hear more about that in our introduction to the workroom if you subscribe for updates on this channel and see when it's live. In the years that followed the war, fashion was reinvented, but for some time Britain struggled, textiles and fashion affected by the government's top-down rules to manage the post-war impact on the economy. Utility clothing continued until 1952, clothes rationing finally abolished to many signs of relief in 1949. With Hull's retail heartland damaged or destroyed by enemy action, searching for a replacement would have been a challenge, but they found it, moving to 60 King Edward Street by mid-1943, a short walk away from their first location and connected to Prospect Street at its southern end, one of the main shopping roads and where the hospital, the Hull Royal Infirmary, was located. What are the main differences you see in Albion Street between then and now? Let us know in the comments below. Close to the junction of Prospect and Story Streets, from 1943, Mirelle at 60 King Edward Street was the last shop in a row under the offices of Ariel Chambers at number 52. Still there today, the door to the chambers is the same as the large picture window once owned by Irene Leonard's, but the shop front at number 60 and interior is different than in its years of trading, although the windows above are identical to then. As this then and now picture shows, Mirelle was at 60 King Edward Street when war ended, the liberation of Paris in 1944 bringing couture back to its home. It had a showroom upstairs at number 52, far above street level, which they called the Salon, as well as at number 60, known as the Boutique, eventually moving the Salon down from Ariel Chambers in November 1951 to focus all selling on the shop floor downstairs. For a short while, another workroom was upstairs also, while the Church Institute was closed for repairs. When they ran fashion shows, they included pictures of both floors in their programmes, and this picture shows the boutique as it was then. The room is long, with a low ceiling and light curtains over the 2 windows. Along one wall is a shelf with items for sale on it, and a curtain underneath, no doubt hiding storage, a chaise longue against one wall for customers to sit on. During the years Mirelle occupied King Edward Street, the city was rebuilt in a more modern style, including Hammonds and Thornton Varleys and Edwin Davis, who'd opened in temporary locations during the war. Costello's did not survive the firestorm, however. From 1952, when most of the rebuilding had finished, retail thrived, and it gives Hull the visual character you see today, like this then and now photo, a mixture of what survived and what was rebuilt from around 52. The picture merges the past with the present, the awning to number 60 saying House of Mirelle in big, bold black letters and taken around 1952. The French salon and boutiques were joined together behind these long, light windows, and Parisian couture was sold alongside well-known high-end fashion labels, giving it the reputation of being even more exclusive than when it first opened in 1938. By 1955, fashion was guided by Paris and London in the main, America and Italy glimmering in the eye with some influence on style and fashion. Small to medium-sized labels were a British fashion success story. Brands like Horella, Horrocks's, Dorville and Rembrandt surviving the war and stocked at the House of Mirelle until they themselves fell by the wayside in the 70s and early 80s. Fueled by a massive industry of woolens and textiles, many British fabrics like cottons or tweeds were used in Parisian designs, silks and satins also, although more usually from the Far East or Italy, like those worn by Mira and her friend. Guided by their collections, the creativity of the British fashion industry and success of fashion retail was substantial throughout this time frame, and at number 60 King Edward Street, the House of Mirelle made substantial gains. As the 50s progressed, boutiques opened in well-known fashion labels where couturiers like Dior and Hardy Amis sold ready-to-wear designs, meaning cut-down versions of their expensive and intensive couture items. Boutiques meant women no longer had to source couture with eye-watering prices to buy from the best, and labels like Dior and Hardy Amis ready-to-wear became accessible to many more than the wealthy women Mirelle knew in 1938. Rules still governed what to wear, however. Hull was full of women dressing for the time of day or special occasion, wearing the right dress, shoes, coat, gloves to match, and hat, jewellery as well. Women who shopped there in the 50s say you wouldn't dream of not dressing properly, and the streets of Hull were like a fashion show, one woman recalling the wind whipping up side panels of fabric on ladies' skirts, the fashion for a floating panel hanging from tightly corseted waists starting in 1949. Mirelle stayed at number 60 until mid-1956, when they moved to Story Street, the diagonal road connecting Albion Street with Prospect Street opposite the Hull Royal Infirmary, slightly away from the busy shopping area of Hull. The infirmary stretched along Prospect Street looking out over to the turn to Story, its grey stone facade, a part of Hull since Victorian times, but by the early 70s that building would also come to an end. From 1952, number 11 Story Street, the French Salon, was next to Jordan's, a motorbike shop rebuilt after the Blitz, replaced by the modern Wilberforce Health Centre. Similar to how it looks today, but missing the plain glass display windows either side a front door, at number 11, workroom girls watched the skyline of Hull from windows on the top, above the wedding room on the first floor where bridal gowns and accessories were sold. The showroom was on the ground floor, as well as the office of Mira and Mirelle's manager Molly Kidd. Between 1956 and 1970, the workrooms were split between the Church Institute and Story Street, where alterations and a few bespoke designs were carried out, with another at La Boutique, a new branch of the business after it opened in 1960. Making up, or making designs from scratch as they did in the 1930s, lessened at Mirelle from 1950 in favour of alterations, and the design arm of the 30s and 40s came to a halt in this era, disappearing completely after 1963. In 1960, Mirelle opened La Boutique, the young face of the business. Under the ultra-modern Cecil Cinema, built in 1955, it was tucked round the corner, facing the opposite side of Anlaby Road in Cecil House, next to Grosvenor House today. There was a small workroom at the back for quick alterations, while the ones at Church Institute and Story Street stayed open for sewing tasks created by the French Salon. This photo from May 1965 shows Prospect and King Edward running from north to south, Albion at the bottom and at right angles to it forming a triangle, Story Street. 60 King Edward Street is on the main road between the junction of Story and the top of the photo, a block that survived the Blitz. In the 60s, Story Street and La Boutique saw the biggest change to fashion when the youthquake of the 50s widened a chasm and in walked mods, rockers and Mary Quant. Couture struggled, incorporating more and more ready-to-wear in order to survive, but still of good quality, which designer Jean Muir called wholesale couture, meaning clothes made well in quality fabrics for middle-class women to wear. Mass production slowly took over from couture. Durable textiles like nylons were easy to manufacture and also cheaper, easier to clean and throw away, and with it fast fashion was born, releasing the focus on 2 fashion seasons a year, and it was the young and chain stores that led the way. Showroom staff say that while this change was happening, older women still wanted to dress as they had throughout their lifetimes, but young people born in the post-war baby boom yearned for something different from that their mothers had worn, and with it the character of retail changed. On Ferens Way near Hammonds and Paragon Station, C&A, a big department store from Europe, opened in 1960, offering cheaper mass-produced clothes, and you served yourself, an industry known as off the peg. Initially they had an alterations department, but that slowly closed across the city as off the peg was found in almost every shop, and the style of service changed accordingly. No longer did people hear, "How can I help you today, madam?" unless they were going to Madame Clapham or the House of Mirelle, and eventually, and perhaps predictably, Madame Clapham closed in 1967, taking almost 70 years of fashion history with it, but Mirelle remained open throughout this time. The showroom girls who work there talk about customers as clients, knowing them and serving them as you would a friend. La Boutique was the cheaper end of the business, where young people went like their daughters, but still comparatively expensive, stocking labels like Rembrandt or Elke Couture. The salon was where you'd find clothes for weddings and special occasions, as well as wholesale couture labels like Diorling. Established in 1968 in London, it was a younger, funkier version of their expensive items, but still had a high-quality range from Dior. During the 60s, America influenced fashion, Italy as well. The world was opening up like the shipping lanes in and out of the docks, attitudes also, but to some in Hull, it felt more like an island than ever before. British bands and the character of Hull's shopping streets hung on with few changes, but the independent small shops started to disappear. La Boutique had a niche and was marketed as a more inexpensive arm of the business, stocking some of the brands previously found in Story Street. Clothes were more affordable there, unlike the French Salon. In 1966, Mira's husband died and she took on a premises owned by his company P. Moss & Co. This photo is taken around 1974 and is of Hallgate in Cottingham, a village about 4 miles away from Hull. Quaint and traditionally English, the short high street with St Mary's Church at the end had many small independent retailers, including the Economy store, which Mira turned into a fashion shop called La Mirabelle, which stayed open until about 1973. Hairdressers Enrico and Nora bought number 169 from Mirelle, establishing their own fashion and beauty business. Seen here on the right, theirs was stretched over 2 shops on either side of the alleyway, 169 on the left. La Mirabelle stayed open until the early 1970s, closing after the business made their next big move. In December 1970, Mirelle made their penultimate change of location. They joined Carmichaels in George Street, Hull's famous and exclusive store. Carmichaels was nicknamed the Harrods of the North by locals, and it was housed in a white building with 3 floors running along one side of George Street, developed into flats in the present day, as you can see in this picture. From the end of 1970, Mirelle was situated above street level, where ceramics in rickety cabinets shook and trembled as shoppers walked on their uneven floors. Combining the salon and la boutique, its remaining workroom was found there as well as the offices. In the picture, they were behind all the windows on the first floor. By the 1970s, fashion had undergone a revolution, and the city of Hull as well. No longer were French and British couture houses the be-all and end-all. New styles abounded, as many as the passing years from when Mirelle opened before World War II. Mass production was the name of the day, and in its wake, independent retailers slowly disappeared, as did many familiar clothing brands, replaced by national chains and department stores. Hull saw closure after closure while Mirelle was at Carmichaels. Thornton Varley's changing into Debenhams, Hammonds into Bins, Edwin Davis closed, and Elsie Battle's one shop, long moved out of the city, remained in Eastbourne, where the family had moved to escape the Blitz. Eventually, in 1976, a new shopping mall opened after the infirmary had been demolished, called the Prospect Centre, which can still be seen today. Moving to Carmichaels brought all sides of the business under one roof, closing the Church Institute, Story Street and La Boutique to reinstate them there. When Carmichaels was sold to the Wilbraham family by its owner Sir Basil Parkes, Mirelle was forced to move again, and they went into the newly built Centre Hotel on Paragon Street. Once more the business was under one roof in Mirelle's final location, a street-level shop under the Centre Hotel Paragon Street, before it became the Portland Hotel. This picture is from 1968, its year of opening, and from left to right the House of Mirelle was behind windows 3, 4 and 5. Lasting for about 18 months in this location, behind floor-to-ceiling windows, Mirelle finished its days there in June 1978. Directors Mira Mountain and Molly Kidd closed down permanently, selling the business to a small fashion company from the area called Marvin's Fashions after an extraordinary 40 years. Hull in 1978 still had its 5 main shopping streets leading towards Queen Victoria Square, but between rebuilding in the 50s and the closure of most shipping in 1976, over the 40 years since its closure, even more changes have happened to what was there then. The Church Institute became a bar and was redeveloped into apartments. The same with the Carmichaels building on George Street. 60 King Edward Street is a newsagent's, Ariel Chambers and the row it lives on now listed buildings. Cottingham still looks very similar, but La Boutique is empty, waiting for the next venture to bring it to life. Retail's changed enormously since Mirelle's day. Prince's Quay, a modern shopping centre, extends over Prince's Dock, and Hammonds department store opposite the station is a place where independent businesses lease out concessions. What do you think are the major changes to Hull's shopping streets? Let us know in the comments below. Throughout Mirelle's 40 years, style and the way fashion was made and marketed changed dramatically. Between the long lines of the 30s and 70s synthetics, women's lives altered beyond recognition and fashion fluctuated too. When Mirelle opened, Paris was the centre of fashion, London second, and with them Hull went through changes that saw its economy based on fishing and retail character come to a close. In the 1970s, independent shops folded to the sales strategies and scaling of nationwide brands and chain stores. Mirelle had to roll with the punches, and they rolled very well. In 1938, Mirelle assured the rich had clothes made to their measurements. By 1978, that meant buying high-end, wholesale couture items stocked on their shelves. Similar to how the royal family is served, Mirelle's expertise was a mix of fashion nous, knowing their clients, and skilled sewing and alterations, and they created a unique business on the island they called home. Shoppers going to Mirelle entered an exclusive, rarefied atmosphere. Like the salons of Bond Street, a showroom girl said, it was a little bit of West One in Hull.